morning, ladies and gents, and welcome to your Walking Talking mock. So your exam will last for an hour and a half. You must make sure that you've got a ruler. You will have to measure things. You might have to work things out. You might want to use a calculator. You can be asked to work out percentages, so make sure you bring those sorts of things with you. What I've just said a minute ago is that you need to answer one question from section A, that's your hazard section, one question from section B, that is your tourism section. You should aim to spend about a mark a minute, is a good guide. Shorter answer questions will require a little bit less time. Turn over, let's make a start. Okay, so first question. It says study figure 1. Things to look out for on the map are, you need to make sure that you use your scale. You need to make sure that you use the north arrow up at the top. First question just asks you a nice and simple one. Name the plate boundary. You've only got a choice of 3 plate boundaries. You either get this right or you get it wrong. It should be nothing more than a one-word answer. See if you can do it. 15 seconds. Get going. Right, the second question, 1A2. So the command word here, the command word is to explain. That means that you need to give reasons. It's a 4-mark question, and they want you to focus specifically on the plate boundary that you can see in figure 1. So you must talk about the plate boundary in figure 1 only. Don't start talking about examples that you have that aren't relevant to that plate boundary. All you've got to try and do, you've got to give reasons for the movement. If you can, you might not have a specific case study, but if you've got an example, or if you can name an example, then do so at this point. This is really a test of whether you can use some high-level terms. You need to remember to explain. So if you've got a process that you can talk about, high-level words, and explain why that's causing the volcanoes there, this is your opportunity to do so. They've got a few key terms that you will want to use. Specifically the ones that have just been to do with the processes to do with volcanoes. It's quite a simple one to do, a nice explain question right at the start. It should take you about 4 minutes. Those 4 minutes start now. Figure 2 is in the insert. It does tell you that it's in the insert. In the real thing, the insert will be an A4 sheet of paper. It will be a magazine style print. So some of you will have seen it in lessons. You need to make sure that you realise that it's yours. You've paid to have it. You can write all over it. If you want to annotate that booklet, like today, you're more than welcome to annotate the booklet today, just to identify some of the things if you want to try and make it clearer what you can see in the picture. The command word today for this question is to describe. You need to say 2 advantages of living in a volcanic area. It does tell you to talk about figure 2 as well, but you don't necessarily specifically have to. It's a nice, easy way of doing something. You get 1 mark for a simple point, 1 mark for a development. If you do that twice, you get all 4 marks. You don't need to use a case study. Again, if you can use high-level language, then feel free to do so, but there aren't any really high-level specific terms linked to this. This is showing your general understanding. Okay, 1C says study figure 3 in the insert. My suggestion is that you take about 60 seconds just to read through the information on the insert, annotate some of the bits of information, make sure you actually understand what the information is telling you. If there are any high-level terms on it, now is the time to think about what those high-level terms mean. That 60 seconds, just have a look through the insert. The figure starts now. Right, so this is going to be one of the harder questions that you come up against in the exam. Actually, even though it says 8 marks with 3 spelling, punctuation and grammar marks, that makes this an 11-mark question because those 3 marks get added on top. So this is one of your most important ones to get right. It's looking for you to give a structured answer. It gives you a prompt quote. So less developed countries are unable to protect people against the damaging effects of earthquakes. The examiner likes to use damaging effects to mean buildings. They aren't really talking about people. You can use the idea of buildings falling down or damage to people as damage to building as leading to people being hurt, but he's meaning damaging effects as something that's happening to the buildings. You can agree or disagree. It doesn't matter which way you go. You can say 1 agree and 1 disagree. You can write 2 paragraphs agreeing with the statement, 2 paragraphs disagreeing with the statement. This is an opportunity for you to use a case study, even though it doesn't say specifically to do so. It does say in the instructions, use a case study where appropriate. This is a test of that chance to do that. You can use your high-level, MEDC or LEDC case study to do it, to say why an MEDC might be more effective or an LEDC might be less effective. Make sure you use the figure. An easy way to use the figure will be to say something like in figure 3 and then actually quote something. Where you'll use it, a nice way to start for this is to actually quote your example. So start off with an example I have studied is, and then name the place that you've studied, say what they did, and then why that makes it either effective or not effective. As I've said, you can choose which way you go about doing it. My preference is for a minimum of 2 Peel paragraphs. But it doesn't matter whether you agree with them or not. So that's point, evidence, explain, and you need to make it clear why what you've said links back to the question. This should take you 10 minutes. So 1D says study figure 4. Figure 4 shows the path or track of the tropical storm. Some of you will have studied Haiyan. It says describe the path of Typhoon Haiyan from the 3rd of November 2013. You get 1 mark for saying where it started, 1 mark for saying what happened in the middle, 1 mark for saying where it ended up. It gives you again a number of things that he'd like you to use. So they want you to use the compass directions, he wants you to use the scale, and in this case the examiner was particularly annoyed because generally students didn't know how to use latitude and longitude. So in this case it's exactly the same as you do with your 4 and 6 figure grid references. You go along the corridor, up the stairs, and they will allow plus or minus 1 or 2 either way, it doesn't matter. So in this case, to tell you exactly where to start, you would say that Typhoon Haiyan began at 155 degrees east and 6 or 7 degrees north of the equator, and that would get you 1 mark. So you can then decide on where your other 2 marks are going to come from. This should be a solid 3-minute question. As before, you're allowed to annotate what you've done so that the examiner doesn't give you credit for what you've put on the piece on the map. Make sure you put a line through any of your annotations in this case. 3 minutes start now. Okay, question 1E. So it's in your insert again. So it says study figure 5 on the insert. Figure 5 is the picture. You can kind of see it up on the board, but it's not particularly good. Your command word here is you need to suggest. It's a 4-mark question. That means you need to make a point with a simple explanation. So they're looking for you to do that twice. So if you make 1 point, you get 1 mark. If you explain it linked to the question, you get a 2nd mark. You then do it again, you get all 4 marks. You can use the information that you've revised. Some of you would have done Typhoon Haiyan as your case study in your lessons, and you're welcome to use those. But in this case, they're kind of testing whether you can just identify things that affect people in the picture. So you might start off with, in figure 5, I can see, and then say something that you can see that affects people, and then explain how that affects their lives. Again, it's a simple thing for you to do. It doesn't necessarily require you to have done a huge amount of revision. It is a 4-mark question, but it really should be taking you about 3 minutes to be able to complete it. So, 3 minutes start now. Okay, so 1F. If you're not aware of what's happening at this point, they are going to test you on each of your 4 natural hazards. So you are going to get something on earthquakes, definitely something on volcanoes, tropical storms and wildfires. At some point in time, all of those are going to come up. It's not necessarily equal depending on which one they want to do. It really depends on what the examiner's chosen. So they've given you a statement in 1F, more people are living in and visiting dry grassland. Explain how this increases the risk of wildfire. So you're looking at the risk of wildfire. Your command word is to explain, which means you're looking to use point, evidence, explain, link. This is an opportunity to use an example, even though it doesn't necessarily ask you explicitly to use one. In Your lessons you would have done about California, you might have done about Black Saturday, you might have done about Greece, they're the ones in the textbook. If you've been on holiday and there's been a wildfire in one of the places that you've gone to, you're more than welcome to use those as well. You need to remember to focus on how living in and visiting those places increase the risk of wildfires. So what is it about the dry grassland and forest areas that make wildfires more likely or might make them worse? My suggestion is to use two peel paragraphs. Risk can be either how they're started or how people are affected by them. So how is it easier for them to get started, or is it likely to make more wildfires, or is it likely to make wildfires worse? Try and refer to a specific case study. An easy way to start this would be an example I have studied is, and then name the example that you've studied. Black Saturday is a really nice example for this, because this is one of the ways that the Black Saturday case study actually started. But you should be able to provide specific information explaining how. This should take you, so the command word here is describe. So it says describe the effects of a wildfire on people and the environment. So this is one where they've specifically chosen a number of words that you need to focus on talking about. The way that this will get marked will be a leveled answer. So you need to think of it either being 1 to 4 will be basic, 5 and 6 will be clear, or maybe you need to do a detailed response. To get into the higher levels, students need to make linkages between the effects. So we're looking for more than just a list of effects. They want to see some sort of development. The command word is to describe, so you don't need to explain why, but they do need you to try and link different effects together if you can. You need to make sure the nature of the effects are clear. Make sure that you talk about the impacts on people and the environment as well. They can go beyond, they can be quite simple things. So this really is something that you can overthink quite a lot. It is an opportunity to use an example. You should have a specific example that you're able to talk about. It's one of the examples that I said you could use for the previous question. Even if you used one example in the previous question and you're going, I've not got another example, that doesn't matter. This is a test of something different. Use the same example. It should take you about 5 minutes. They are essentially, if you divide it up into one section about impacts on people and one section about impacts on the environment, that's a way to go about doing it. You don't have to do it like that. You can do social, economic, environmental if you like. I am looking really for 2 paragraphs. 2 paragraphs with linked effects. So it should take 5 minutes. That starts now. For the last question, the command word is suggest. So it's a 4-mark question. That means that you need to make a point here, and then you need to go on to explain. The examiner in this case didn't like it if you just lift from the figure. So you need to say something you know about and then explain how that's going to reduce the effect of wildfires. You can name something specific if you can. You can name a specific place. You don't need to go into a huge amount of detail. It needs a point with a development statement making it clear how. That's what they're looking for. This is something that they do to make people aware of wildfires, and this is what it does to reduce the risk of them. You've done a number of things. Don't just lift from the figure. This should take you about 3 minutes. It should be 90 seconds between each of the sections. Those 3 minutes start now. Okay. So if you go onto the tourism section, hopefully you can see in the top left-hand corner, it says number 4. You don't need to do in this exam, Unit 2 only, you don't need to do questions 2 and 3. You should only do questions 1 and 4. Question 1 is natural hazards. Question 4 is tourism. Every single year, even though I stand here and tell people I've been doing it for 4 years, every single year I get somebody come out and go, wow, there's loads to do, and I find out that they actually filled in the entire exam. There is twice as much in the exam as you could possibly do. So make sure you do the sections that you have revised and you have been taught. The second section will be at the back of the paper. I've removed the 2 sections that you don't need. In your actual exam, at the top of the tourism section, it will say investigating global tourism, like it does just here. That is the only indication, other than number 4, that the tourism section has begun. So don't just go straight on to the next section. If there's a new number, then make sure that you have actually studied it. It should give you a guide and should tell you the title for that unit of work at the top, but there won't be a big introductory kind of page missing. It won't tell you you should be doing this. My suggestion in the actual Unit 2 exam is put a neat line across the start of the units that you haven't studied. Tourism. So question 4 says study figure 18. Figure 18 is the map below. What it asks you to do is describe the distribution. So what it's looking for is for you to, you don't need to explain why they're there, but you need to say why that particular group of countries is linked together. Sorry, you don't need to say why, you just need to say what the group is. So where are all of those countries distributed? It's quite a simple thing. The mark scheme is 1 plus 1. You get 1 mark for saying each of the things linked to where they're grouped and where they're not grouped. So think of where the colours are missing from as well. You don't need to say why. It's just where are they? Distribution just means pattern. So this is a 2-mark question, but it's quite a simple one, and they might be quite lenient on the first question, so it should take you about 90 seconds. So your 90 seconds starts now. Okay, so 4A2 takes a little bit of imagination. So you need to describe how the distribution of destinations for tourists from the UK is likely to have changed. So what you've got to do is think of if this map was to be drawn showing those popular destinations now, what might be the difference? You don't need to say why, you just need to say where. How would they be grouped together? So hopefully you've talked about where they're grouped together in the first question. What might the difference be? What might it look like if that map was to be drawn now? You don't need to say why, you just need to say what the look would be. Again, it's a 2-mark question, nice and simple, 90 seconds. 4B. The command word here is to suggest. So hopefully by now we're understanding what we need to do with a suggest question. That means you need to make a point and make a simple explanation. It doesn't need to be a peel paragraph. It doesn't necessarily need to involve a case study. You need to talk about the growth of tourism. So it divides it up quite neatly for you. So you get 2 marks for each of these sections. So 2 for increased wealth, 2 for increased leisure time. I've written an example of how you would structure even 1 sentence that would get you all of the marks. They are looking for you to use high-level terms if you can. So I've said that this is the way I'd set it out. This is one of the factors linked to increased tourism, and then explain how that factor has led to the growth in tourism. I didn't feel confident in giving you a specific example because I think that would just tell you exactly what the answer is. So if you can't think of something to do with increased wealth, think of, if you can't, so for my classes I talked about the money left over after you had got rid of your rent and your necessities. You had money left over. If you can name that high-level term, then feel free to do so. You've also learnt specific details about number of days holiday, how much money people earn now on average. Anything to do with those, they will get you, they will make your point, and then you need to explain them. They will get you a mark specifically. So if you can name those or use those specific facts, do so in this section. Should take you, again, it shouldn't really take you 4 minutes. 3 minutes, off you go. Question 4C. So it says study figure 19 in the insert. So you need to get your booklet out again, and you need to have a look for figure 19. I think it's a picture showing 1 picture on top and 1 picture on the bottom. Your command word here is to suggest. So you need to make sure that you can identify something from the picture and then explain why that provides opportunities for tourist activities. You can use a case study if you like. Your case study doesn't necessarily need to be your tourism case study. If you can think of one from coasts or urban that you think would be an appropriate case study in this case, feel free to do so, but you do need to make sure why that links to tourist activities. My suggestion here is that I would set at least one paragraph up like this. This is something I can see in the picture, and this is something good, and this is why that therefore leads to a tourist activity, and I can name those tourist activities. The first picture, the white sandy beach, I could think of lots of things people would be doing on that as tourist activities, or in the sea. You need to name those specifically. My suggestion here is 3 simple paragraphs. Make a point, explain how that creates some sort of opportunity for tourist activities. Again, nice and simple question. It shouldn't be a mark a minute. This should only take you 5 minutes. 4D. So the command word here is describe. The word to pay attention to here is how. So you need to look at developments in transport and how they've linked to the growth in tourism. So I've given you 2 kind of sample ways of setting up your answer. So you could say, this is a development in transport which has led to this specific thing, which is a growth in tourism. You can do the same thing with something makes it something else. A simple point with a simple link. The thing that I thought you might struggle with here is that it doesn't require an explanation, but they do want you to develop it, which looks really strange. And one of the things that I found it quite difficult to do is explain exactly what the examiner wanted to see here. You are more than welcome to copy this word for word, and it will get you 2 marks. I didn't see any other way of doing it. So where it says faster planes reduce the time it takes, so that is the development in transport. To get to distant locations, making far-flung locations more accessible. The more accessible bit is my development. That's the growth in tourism. If you want to copy that word for word, you are more than welcome to. I will tell your teachers you've done that, but they will accept that as 2 of the marks. Please feel free to do so. You then need to think of another development in transport that has caused the growth in tourism as well. This should take you about 3, given that I've given you one of the answers, this should take you about 3 minutes. Off you go. 4E, really, really simple, 1 mark. It's a key term you should have been taught. Sometimes those key terms can be adapted very slightly. You either know this or you don't. You don't need to give the exact definition. There is no exact definition. You just need to be in the approximate ballpark of what the development gap is. So you either know that or you don't, and I'm not going to give you any more information. Should take you less than 60 seconds. Question 4F. So it says study figure 20, which is the map below and the flow chart. 4F1, it says, what is the distance from the international airport to Costa do Sauípe? You need to get your ruler out, you need to measure it, and then you need to use the scale. Don't make the mistake of rounding this up or down. They are looking for a specific exact number. They will give you plus or minus 1. But if you round it up to, it is not an even number. A lot of our students put 80. It is not 80. Okay, so if you've put 80, then you've got it wrong. So again, this shouldn't be any more. It should be 30 seconds. If you don't have a ruler, use a bit on your pen or something like that, or your finger. You should use your ruler. The command word here is to explain. So it's growth of tourism in developing countries and how it benefits people. So you should aim to write a minimum of 2 Peel paragraphs. You should use an example and key terms regularly. You need to remember to say why a specific factor, something that has happened in that country, actually helps people. So benefit means to help them. You should aim to talk about both people and the environment, because it asks you to talk about people and the environment. It can be in different paragraphs, or it can be in the same paragraph saying that if people have been helped, Therefore, it might lead to an improvement in the environment in some way, shape or form. The examiner, in this particular case, said that the case study route was the best way to get all of the marks. So if you can talk about a specific case study and how in that specific case study people were helped by the increase in tourism, that was good. He mentioned specifically Kenya and Costa Rica, but we have also done about Belize as well. So you need to talk about specific things that have happened in those countries to do with tourism that help people's lives. So you can talk about quality of life and standard of living as well. There's loads of information. Remember to use figure 20 as well. You don't have to use a case study, but it is the best approach in this case. So if you haven't got a case study, you can still get all 11 marks, but it's less likely. Finally, it is marked using levels, so there is no, that if you use a certain number of pieces of data, that doesn't really matter. It's the clarity and the detail with which you answer the question. If you drift off and answer a different question that you think you've been answering because you've written a long paragraph, you will get a lower mark. So it's about making sure everything clearly links back to the question. Finally, 3 marks available for spelling, punctuation and grammar. That means this is an 11-mark question. Make sure that you take some time at the end of this question to read everything through. It should take you 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes start now. Okay, so 4G, so study figure 21. Figure 21 is the graph. The question says describe the change to the amount of aircraft fuel used between 2010 and 2050. So what you need to do is describe what's happening to the line. Are there any changes where it gets steeper or it plateaus? Do they happen in specific years? If they happen in specific years, name them. This is an opportunity for you to get your calculator out, and you should get your ruler out as well. You should work out specifically how much it is at the start, how much it is at the end, and a nice thing to do is manipulate the data by working out the difference. And you should be able to work out your difference. Your maths teacher told me that that isn't something that's above any of you. This is a 2-mark question. You need to make 2 points about what happens on the graph. You don't need to explain why. You just need to say this is the general trend. Manipulate the data as well. If there's anything else about how the trend changes on the graph, feel free to use that as well. Talk about whether it fluctuates. Does it go up or down steadily? Does it increase dramatically, decrease dramatically at a particular point? Remember to use the numbers. It should, from this point, having looked at it now, it should take you about 90 seconds. So it says suggest the impact of air travel on the global environment. So suggest, we've done suggest before. That means we need to identify something that happens and give a reason why. We need to do it twice. You should have done an entire lesson on the impact of tourism on the environment. You can talk about things like climate change and global warming. Try and be specific. Try and use key terms. Try and use data. This should take you no more than 4 minutes. I would imagine quite a lot of you will be finished sooner than that. Off you go. Right then, ladies and gents, last question. 6 marks should take us 6 minutes. It says study figure 22. Figure 22 is the box at the top of the page, just above the question for 4H. It gives you a load of information about national park authorities and what they do in the UK. The question, the command word is describe. They're asking you to say how, which makes it one of these funny questions again, where you've got to try and make links and develop. You don't need to go to a point where you fully explain, but you need to kind of say what it's doing. You need to talk about planning and management and how that makes tourism more sustainable. So that means making sure that it doesn't damage the environment or doesn't damage what's there for future generations to enjoy the level of what we have at the moment. For this question specifically, the examiner got quite frustrated and annoyed about the fact that people just lifted information and expected to get marks for it. My suggestion would be to use a specific case study if you can, and you should have at least one. You can talk about the National Parks case study. However, the examiner talked quite the examiner said quite a lot about how well the ecotourism example in particular was very effective. He did mention about how many people did well and used things like the Great Barrier Reef if you've done that in class. Quite a lot of you won't have done that or won't have reached that point, or you may have just done it in your lessons. If you can remember that, you're more than welcome to. But the ecotourism example is the one that the examiner said people did best on. Mention a case study. That is one of the big things that he said. You need to say about somewhere specific. This should be a number of factors, and then, so this is something that happened, this is what it did to make it more sustainable. If you can use specific examples and numbers, please feel free to do so. It should take you no more than 6 minutes. That will mean that you're spot on out for break time. You've been superb. Thank you very much for listening to me. 6 minutes, go.